All right, our last video on Bacon's Of Truth was the first of the videos I'm going to shoot on the Bacon's essays, these magnificent test balloons, these trials of ideas that he embarks upon here, following in the footsteps of Michel de Montaigne, as I say, a part of the scientific age, which he is to some degree initiating himself. And the companion essay to Of Truth that I'm going to look at is Of Simulation and Dissimulation. Now, the standard English understanding of dissimulation to this day, not that it's used that much, would be related to dissembling. And dissembling would be connected to telling falsehoods. So it sounds like the antithesis of what he said in his essay Of Truth. But that would be surprising when we saw how strongly Bacon advocates telling the truth and the importance of the truth in all things. And it's going to be a part of his whole inductive scientific methodology to establish truth in a way that is going to be practical and useful. And Bacon himself was a practical man. He served as a politician. However, on the other hand, he was actually indicted by Parliament, and he was removed from office for having accepted bribes. So one might think with that background that perhaps Bacon is in fact open to the idea of telling lies and being corrupt and so forth. Later historiographers seem to think that Bacon's accepting of bribes, while real, was no worse than it would have been for any other individual. It was part of the oil that greased politics, and really it was a way of getting at the king, which they couldn't get at directly, but they went after his first minister instead and got him. But having said that, I don't think that he is talking about lying here in this little essay. Dissembling is a way of avoiding revealing your hand. And he's going to talk in this essay about the strategy of deceit, a way of deceiving somebody, not telling them, not revealing the truth. Now, that's not the same thing as lying to them. It's concealing your intentions. It does, however, bear on a theme to some degree, which is raised by Augustine. We saw this last semester, if you were with me in the history of literary theory, when we looked at Augustine in book 4, where he talks about rhetoric and its uses, because rhetoric is also a means of persuasion, all the possible means of persuasion, in fact. And one of the possible means of persuasion, if we use Aristotle's definition, which I just cited, is that we will also not tell the entire truth at every particular moment, because it's not practical to do so. And that is, I think, what Bacon is discussing here. He's not talking about lying. Note that the title of the essay is not Of Lying, it's Of Simulation and Dissimulation. And he talks about it as a strategy, as a means to achieve a certain outcome. And he tells us when to dissemble or to simulate, and when not to. And both of them, both simulation and dissimulation, he seems to think, are convenient and advantageous, but using them properly requires, as he says, a strong heart and a strong wit. And so he begins by explaining that dissimulation is a shadowy sort of strategy. Remember last time when he was talking about truth, he talked about a candle as compared to the sunlight. To some degree, dissimulation is referring to the candle. And it's a strategy that you require discernment for. And so it's to some degree associated with the classical virtue of prudence, which is knowing what to do at what time. It's not only knowing what's right, it's putting into practice at the right time what the right thing to do is. And that takes a fair degree of wisdom. You have to know when to speak, you have to know to whom you are to speak, and finally, you have to know when to speak. And you're furthermore obliged to discern how much to communicate, not to give more than is required of you. Because if you do give away too much, then you will get into the problem of having to lie to get to the outcome that you desire. So he says that you should either hold your tongue or you should learn how to lie in that latter case. When you are in the position where you have to get what you want, then you will have to either hold your tongue or to lie. But rather than doing that and being in that situation, which he does not want to be in himself, he says that it's better to be evasive. Be evasive rather than tell falsehoods. Now, in this, he's also engaging with a political theorist in Italy by the name of Niccolo Machiavelli, who is much alluded to by Shakespeare as well. If you know of anything of Shakespeare's plays, then you will know that Shakespeare is often referencing Machiavelli either explicitly or implicitly in his politician speeches, and usually reviling Machiavelli, because for Machiavelli, morality and politics have nothing to do with one another. For Machiavelli, you ought to appear virtuous, but not actually be virtuous. And you would appear virtuous because, again, it's a form of dissembling. It's making people think something and conclude something on their own. So when Bacon writes on this, to some degree, one wonders whether he is, in fact, advocating a Machiavellian position. And he could be seen that way. I'm not sure what the scholars actually conclude on that front. But what he is really talking about here, I don't think he is a Machiavellian, because he actually thinks there is such a thing as morality, and that it is objective, and that it is something that we should hold to. And I don't see that in Machiavelli. That's not what I find there. So he's talking about something slightly different here. He's talking about concealing. And there are 3 degrees that he explains here in this little essay of simulation and dissimulation. Firstly, he argues about secrecy and reserve. He thinks that reserve, or holding your cards close to your chest, is a supreme virtue. A man who is reserved does not say everything that he thinks, hears, he says, more secrets than others, and certainly more than he reveals. And he says that the man who makes himself secret, that is his intentions, the thoughts of his heart secret, and does not tell the secrets to everyone, is often told secrets by everyone. This is a practical observation he makes as a politician. He holds his counsel. He does not reveal his counsel to everyone who asks for it even. And so he says, and to be open is to open yourself up to the position where eventually you are forced into having to lie. And he wants to avoid lying. So this is the path of simulation and dissimulation that he recommends. And he points out that a man who makes himself secret, as I say, is told secrets. And that then is will lead him over the passage of time, if he follows Bacon's counsel, to learn when and how and to whom he should open his thoughts by scoping out the landscape, watching other people's reactions, etc. And at that point, he then can be candid and sincere without any masking going on. And this sort of person is of great worldly use, he thinks. And he says that all the mysteries in the world are due to secrets being held. So he talks about this, and again, I think it might be fruitful to compare and contrast what Bacon says here with what Augustine says, say, when he talks about cosmetics and adornment and so forth. I don't think they're talking about the same thing at all, but they do seem to be in that same sort of ballpark. But so that's the first degree of concealment. He says that the habit of secrecy in public and in private life is to be commended. He thinks it is a wise course of action. But there's a second degree of concealment. The first was secrecy. The second is dissimulation, which is then necessarily followed by secrecy. Now, Bacon argues that a person, for the purposes of his secrecy, should be a dissembler. And what do I mean by that? A person who pretends something that he is not to some degree. And the men around us, and the reason why this is the case is because of the reality that I mentioned in the very first lecture, that Bacon and all of his peers acknowledge that other people are sinners just as he is. And they, as a consequence, are very sly. And they will not want you to be discreet, and they will not want you to be closed in your counsel. They will be trying to pry open and know what you think. And they'll trouble you, he thinks, with questions. And if you don't answer the questions, they will assume by your silence things that you may not have intended or ever have said by your speech. So that might be to your advantage. So he says it's better to say nothing than to say something if one does not have to. So it's a form of, again, of avoidance. So it's not lying, it's allowing people to take the wrong impression. And this allows you to maintain your secrecy. And it will allow you to do so for a little bit longer because you can't simply be silent for too long. So dissembling is what allows you to maintain and further the silence that he recommended in the beginning. The third degree that he speaks to, which is simulation and false profession, is what he says. And he says that I hold more culpable and less politic. So now he's got to the degree where this policy of simulation dissimulation is starting to move into what we would call lying. And he regards that more culpable. And he says, except it be in great and rare matters. In great and rare matters. And he sees it as a vice then. And it symbolizes and becomes easily something habitual. And those sorts of people, he thinks, that do this either of a natural falseness or fearfulness, or of a mind that hath some main faults, which, because a man must needs disguise, it maketh him practice simulation in order in other things, lest his hand should be out of so out of practice. So the problem with moving into the third degree of simulation and false profession is that you become a liar, at which point you no longer know truth from falsehood yourself. And the whole practice of simulation and dissimulation, which was a shadowy practice, undoes you, and you then fall down in the traps that other people might have fallen into by your dissimulation. Now you fall into it by being a liar. So what are the advantages of this? This is in the final section of there. He said he sees three. First of all is being ambiguous about your intentions. You can surprise. And you can surprise people that are opposed to you. The second is that if you do fail, because you've not revealed your intentions, your failure will not be known by all, because your intentions were hidden. Whereas once you've declared what you intend to do, you've announced to everyone, here's my my 5-year plan. Here's my mission statement, as it were. Once you put that out in public, you are required to achieve that, or you will be judged to be a failure or not capable of achieving the aims that you've publicly professed. The third advantage is that by maintaining your secrecy, you can discover the minds of others. And this one seems to me particularly important to Bacon, but note that he thinks that words relate to thoughts. Now, this is a topic of conversation that I raised in my contemporary theory lecture. The first one is that Bacon assumes, just as Augustine did, and just as everyone does actually all the way up until contemporary literary theory, that words relate to thoughts, because our thoughts also relate in many ways to the mind of God, and that's because we're rational beings. Bacon is a rationalist and falls within the rationalist tradition. So Bacon argues that the person who opens himself up, others will not reveal themselves to, because that man is not to be trusted. He's not somebody who can hold his counsel. He tells things too freely, and they will then turn his free tongue, his liberal tongue, to conclude that you are going to be not particularly candid in your dealings with them. And so they will not tell you what they're thinking. And so he quotes a Spanish proverb, tell the lie and find the truth. He concludes with 3 disadvantages. What are the 3 disadvantages of simulation and dissimulation? Well, which are, by the way, synonyms for him. They're not antitheses, they're synonyms. What are the 3 disadvantages? Well, the first is that it makes you weak and fearful. unlike telling the truth, which makes you strong and fearless. The second is that such attitudes make you somebody that other people don't want to deal with. They don't trust you. You're not straight with them. The third and the last one is it deprives you of the fundamental principle of life, namely trust and belief. You're making of yourself to be as a god, knowing or determining both good and evil. Bacon does not say that, but I think that is what he has in mind. And so in the end, he advocates, having done this essay, an excursion, looking at the issue from various sides, he concludes with the advice that the best that a man should do is be open in fame and opinion, be reserved in his habits, dissembling in particular instances when necessary, and having the strength to pretend as need be. So with that, he concludes and to some degree summarizes what he said in his first essay of truth with this one, and we get together a guide to practical action. Thank you. See you next time.